Ready for war? The man in charge of defence tells us we must be and sends a signal to the Kremlin.
This is a message to Moscow as well. This is Britain standing behind making our armed forces stronger, but making our industrial base stronger.
Well, he's here, John Healey, the Defence Secretary, along with the Conservatives' Robert Jenrick, fresh from chasing fare dodgers on the London Tube. And a family story that is hard to believe. David Challen's mum, Sally, killed his dad after years of abuse. David helped free her from prison and change the law. We'll meet him today.
There's a necessity to tell my story, otherwise it would have swallowed me whole. Many adult child survivors tell their stories later on in life, 50s or 60s. I'm doing it now because it almost swallowed me. I almost didn't survive it.
And our team at the desk for the next 60 minutes. In his first TV appearance, Sir Simon Case, for years the country's top civil servant, Labour lawyer and peer Baroness Shami Chakrabarti, and businesswoman and designer Kiki McDonough. Morning. Let's start, as we always do, with what is making the news. Defence, no surprise, is the splash for the Sunday Times. It claims the government's planning to buy jets that could carry nuclear missiles. Not the same as ordering new nukes, but interesting nonetheless. The Sunday Telegraph's front features migrants crossing the Channel yesterday and the £1.5 billion the government's promising to build new arms factories. The Sunday Express leads on Robert Jenrick, who's with us, his plan to arm some prison officers. And The Independent leads with suggestions that some obese patients might be denied some NHS treatment. Here at the BBC, we are leading on reports that at least 26 people were killed when Israeli tanks opened fire near a food distribution centre in Gaza. Let's then talk about our main event today. A warm welcome to all three of you. We're about to speak to the Defence Secretary, John Healey, at a really important moment. Now, Simon, you were the country's top civil servant when this review was commissioned. In the last few days, you said interesting things, that we need a sort of second nuclear deterrent alongside Trident. What should people at home be listening out for from John Healey?
Well, I think overall the most important thing is defence is often boiled down to a conversation about money. This is a government that is saying it's going to set aside the right amount of money for this, but what we want to know, are we going to do the right things with that money? Is that money going to be well spent? And one of the things, as you say, in the papers this morning, is this idea of making sure we've got the right nuclear weapons. Nuclear weapons are the cornerstone of our national security and have been for decades, but we're unusual. We have only one system, nuclear weapons on submarines. Most other nations have their nuclear weapons on a number of different systems. Take the French, our near neighbour, submarines, and they have them on aircraft. So for both reasons of resilience and flexibility, there's an argument about having a second way of carrying nuclear weapons.
That sounds, though, incredibly expensive. Kiki, you run a business. At the moment, there is not much money around, either in the economy or in government. So do you think the government can afford to be spending all this extra cash on defence?
Yes, I do. I think it's really important. But actually, I would start right at the bottom of the chain, and I think it's important to give the soldiers good living quarters. I think I saw a programme about 2 years ago, I think on the BBC, about how they live, and I think it's shocking. And they've got a recruitment problem, and I'm not surprised. I think we need to respect them and take care of them. These people are putting their lives on the line for us. So we start there. And then we go to drones and nukes and everything else you want to talk about. But I think, boots on the ground. You look at Ukraine and there are boots on the ground. It's not going to be just a drones war. Somebody's got to operate them and be there.
It's interesting that one of the real problems the MOD's had is recruitment and just literally not getting enough people into the forces. But Shami, this isn't all comfortable territory for everyone in the Labour Party, is it? There's a political awkwardness around defence for Labour.
There can be, but I have to so agree with Kiki about veterans who have not been well treated. In my adult lifetime, we've seen real wars, and we've seen people come back from those wars broken, end up in prison, on the streets, etc., etc. Not so glamorous, not nuclear weapons, but that's the other side of war.
It's a very wide spectrum of suggestions that you've put forward for the Defence Secretary, and we'll hear from him in just a second. It does feel like for many months, you and me have had ministers queuing up in this studio to tell us again and again that the world is becoming more dangerous. But it is now becoming clearer what they plan to actually do about it. more munitions we expect, more nuclear, more men and women, they hope, more tech, more money, more jobs. All of that we think tomorrow's review will suggest. More involvement from industry, more facilities like this factory in Stevenage, where John Healey showed us Storm Shadow missiles yesterday. They cost not far off £1 million each. And this year they've been used in the skies above Ukraine as part of the effort to fend off Russia.
You can see by these colours, we're actually the red team, the bad team.
But the defence review is not just intended to say more, but to convey a signal to the UK's foes, especially the Kremlin, about the commitment this government is willing to make.
Big new investments, £6 billion over the next 5 years in factories like this, which allow us not just to produce the munitions that equip our forces for the future, but to create the jobs in every part of the UK. And this is a message to Moscow as well. This is Britain standing behind making our armed forces stronger, but making our industrial base stronger. And this is part of our readiness to fight, if required.
What goes through your mind when you come to a place like this?
Well, what I'm struck by is such a strong sense of pride and purpose with anyone who works in a factory like this or a lab like we've seen today. And it's that sense that they're part of a mission, they're part of many roles, but one defence.
Well, John Healey's with us today. Thanks so much for giving us your time. I think a lot of people will be very struck to hear you say, as one of the most senior people in our government, this is a message to Moscow. Do you actually expect that Russia is going to try to attack the UK?
Russia is attacking the UK daily as part of 90,000 attacks we get that are linked to different states on our defence system in cyberspace. It's one of the reasons that we're acting already, and we're putting an extra $1 billion in to create a new cyber command and to link our armed forces with the digital connections that make them more effective in the future. So we're in a world that is changing now. We've got to respond, and it is a world of growing threats. It's growing Russian aggression, it's those daily cyber attacks, it's new nuclear risks, and it's increasing tension in other parts of the world as well. And so the SDR, the Strategic Defence Review we publish tomorrow, will set out a vision for how our forces must respond, but how we can keep the British people safer as well.
And cyber attacks are a very serious risk, but they're very different to something that people might imagine when they hear you say we must be ready to fight, or when they hear the Prime Minister or read the Prime Minister in the papers this morning saying we are being directly threatened by states with advanced military forces. So just to be really clear, this is incredibly serious. Are you actually telling people you expect there in the next few years to be some form of attack on this country?
We have to be prepared. NATO has to be prepared. We see Putin in Ukraine trying to redraw international boundaries by force. For the first time since the Second World War, we've got full-scale war in Europe. It's part of the growing Russian aggression, and it's why NATO itself, as well as the UK, is stepping up our ability to deter as well as to defend in the future. And it's that strong deterrence that will give us the greater security in the future. But part of the deterrence is not just making our forces stronger, it's making our industrial base stronger. So the big defence investment, by diverting funds from overseas development aid, will go into reinforcing the British industrial base, more jobs in every part of the UK.
But just to be really clear about this, when you say ready to fight, are you worried enough to make big changes because you think there is actually a threat of direct conflict in this country? Because I think saying we have to be ready for war is going to sound like that to a lot of people. Maybe you can reassure them or make them feel more concerned.
Look, the world is more uncertain. The tensions are greater, but we prepare for war in order to secure the peace. If you're strong enough to defeat an enemy, you deter them from attacking in the first place. That's what has made NATO the most successful defensive alliance in history. For over 70 years, it's helped keep the peace and the stability in Europe. And so it's the same principle now. Faced with greater conflicts, faced with greater uncertainties, we have to be more ready to fight in order to avoid the wars we do not want to fight.
And you mentioned NATO there, the partnership of many democratic countries, all pooling resources and promising to protect each other. But NATO right now, its leader is calling for significant amounts of extra cash. And we heard Simon Case say there, it's not all about money, but it is very much about money. You've said you have no doubt that the country will spend 3% of the share of our national income on defence by 2034. But that's nearly 10 years away. And I just wonder, do you have a specific guarantee of that from the Chancellor, from the Treasury? Because our viewers know, and they've heard it before, if the Treasury is not saying yes officially, if it's not in the spreadsheets, it ain't guaranteed to happen at all.
Well, I look at the way the world's changing. I look at the way the Chancellor is fixing the economic foundations of the country. I see increasing growth. I see the Office of Budget Responsibility rising its forecasts for growth in this country. You know, I have no doubt that we'll hit that ambition of meeting 3%
but the question is
during the next Parliament. But we're not. This is not about next Parliament. This year, the Chancellor has put an extra £5 billion into defence. We've done that to meet the security challenges, but we've done that because we can make defence the engine for growth in this country.
But you're talking about this review presenting a whole new vision, a new vision that comes with a price tag. And there are many people in the defence world who think actually the 2.5 doesn't cover all the existing things we're already doing, let alone what might happen in future. So I'll ask again, do you have a guarantee from the Treasury that ultimately this country will spend 3% of national income on its defence? That would be a significant extra chunk of spending.
We have an extra £5 billion this year. We have a historic commitment to increasing defence spending to 2.5% in 2 years' time. We haven't hit that level since Labour was last in power in 2010, and an ambition to meet 3% in the next Parliament.
So it's still just an ambition, that's not a guarantee?
This is enough to deliver the vision of the SDR, a vision that will see a transformation of our armed forces, where we combine the power of innovation and tech and autonomy alongside the heavy metal of tanks, artillery and planes. A plan in which we see a defence dividend, the extra money we put into defence, bringing new jobs, new tech, new businesses right across the country. And above all, putting defence people right at the heart of our defence plans with better pay and better housing. That's how we strengthen our armed forces. It's how we make the British people safer.
And of course you want to emphasise the commitments that you've got to spend money in the next couple of years. But this is about also what comes next. It can take years to get anything built in the defence world. That's why the long term matters so much. And your allies in NATO are saying it must be more. The head of NATO is saying that countries should be spending, we expect 3.5%. And in a couple of weeks, there's a big get-together, a NATO summit in The Hague. You'll be there with all your NATO allies. They're going to be told to pay 3.5%. What are you going to say to them? Will you sign up to that?
Well, do you know that summit in 3 weeks' time? There will be talk about funding profiles and percentages of GDP. But at the heart of this is not just how much the nations spend, but how we spend it. And you will see just as much concentration on what are the capabilities that NATO together needs in order to deter adversaries in the future. And the summit will be as much about those commitments we make, and the SDR delivers the vision for us to be able to step up.
But you know, Secretary of State, it is also going to be about how much. The head of NATO has said that, President Trump has said that. The pressure will be on for countries to commit to 3.5%. So will you sign up to that? Because it sounds like you feel you can't.
Well, we've made a historic commitment to increase defence spending, the largest increase since the end of the Cold War. It's how much you spend, but also how you spend it. And the SDR gives us the vision for the future.
So in a few weeks, you're going to say to allies, sorry, we can't do 3.5% yet. It's not happening.
In 3 weeks' time, we're going to say, as we are, we're a country and a government with a NATO-first policy. We've recognised, and I've argued for 5 years, that European nations in NATO need to do more of the heavy lifting, and we will. I want to put Britain at the leading innovation edge of NATO nations, and we will. And the Brits have always been ready to step up.
But
we're doing that now, and we will do that in the future. The SDR gives us the direction for how to do that.
But the UK won't be saying NATO first if it's near NATO last in terms of not signing up to the target. But let's move on to some of the practical questions.
Sure.
And I'd like, if we can, to go quite quickly through these, perhaps, because
Okay.
there's so much that we can talk about. Everyone knows that the army's been depleted. There have been real challenges with getting people to join and then stay in the forces. Your target's 73,000, but the number's gone down since the election. So when do you think you'll hit the target of 73,000 people in the army?
You're right. 15 years of a recruitment and retention crisis in our forces. Last government set and missed targets every year in every service for those 14 years.
So when do you think you'll hit your target?
So we've narrowed the gap, but we've still got more people leaving than joining. The first job is to reverse that trend, and then I want to see in the next Parliament our ability to start to increase the number of our
So
full-time
not till the
forces.
next Parliament. So you're saying this is transformative new vision, but you're not going to increase the forces until after the next general election, which is in 4 years'
My first
time.
task as Defence Secretary is to reverse that long-run decline, that deep-set crisis in recruitment, deep-set crisis in retention. And it's one of the reasons that I gave the biggest pay rise for 20 years to our armed forces last year, another above-inflation increase for this year, and why this week I've committed an extra £1.5 billion, as Kiki was saying, £1.5 billion extra in this Parliament over the next 5 years to upgrade forces housing. It is a scandal that we've expected our armed forces families to live in conditions that you or I would not tolerate.
Okay, let's ask about something else specific. The UK currently doesn't have a medium helicopter programme after the retirement of the Puma helicopters. When will the new ones be in use?
So that's a procurement in progress at the moment. Those sort of judgments we'll make in due course. Tomorrow, the SDR, that will set out the way that we've got to think afresh about the requirement to be ready to fight if required, stronger to deter, about the way that we reinforce our defence industrial base using the defence investment increase that we're using by diverting the overseas development money, and crucially, how we put the innovative technology in the hands of the warfighter, because what Ukraine tells us is the nation that is able to harness the power of technology, recognizing the nature of the changing warfare, will give their forces the battlefield edge. And that's what we will do.
But speed is very important here too. I mean, you talk to people in the defence sector, they say it's not necessarily what you buy, it's not necessarily how much you spend, it's also about how quickly you can deliver it. And an answer in Parliament revealed recently, you've only ordered 3 more drones since you've been in charge. You spent 10 months doing this defence review, and I think people will hear there are lots of fine ambitions, fine words you're talking about this morning, saying a new vision, you want to repurpose what the country's doing, this is a moment of real new threat, and you must make these changes. But you won't hit your target for rebuilding the army to the number of soldiers it should be at until the next Parliament. You've told us that the decision about new helicopters will be in due course. I just wonder, listening to you, you're saying this is a message to Moscow that we're strong and ready to fight, but actually the message to Moscow might be, you know what, we'll have to get back to you.
No, the message to Moscow is that we will transform our armed forces, they will be stronger and British people will be safer.
But by when?
We are acting with urgency. Since the election, we have let more than 600 major contracts. Just today, we're announcing the £6 billion for munitions, including at least 6 new munitions factories. This is about the readiness of our forces to fight and therefore to deter the wars of the future. But it's also about the readiness of our industry. That's the lesson from Ukraine. An armed forces is only as strong as the industry that stands behind it. So what we're looking to put in place is not just replenish the stockpiles of the missiles that we may need, but also to make sure that in Britain we have the industry that's capable of innovating and is capable of producing and scaling up if we face conflict in the future.
And do you think that the UK should have a new extra way of delivering nuclear weapons?
Well, the SDR tomorrow will talk about the new threats that we face. Won't get into the sort of discussions that need to remain private, not public, but my job as Defence Secretary is to make sure that we defend the country. And I want to make a broader point about the nuclear deterrent, which is this. For over 70 years, our UK nuclear deterrent has been the ultimate guarantee of security in this country. It's what Putin fears most. And we are the only nation in NATO that commits our nuclear deterrent in full to the defence of other NATO allies. And strong deterrence is absolutely vital to keep us and our NATO allies safe.
Viewers will remember, it was about 12 weeks ago, the Prime Minister sat there and said he was going to build a coalition of the willing. You yourself said shortly after there would be reassurance forces, potentially British troops on the ground in Ukraine to protect the peace that people want to see so much. Where is the coalition of the willing?
The coalition of the willing is the discussions of around 30 nations, the commitments that many of those are ready to make, to the planning that we are leading alongside the French. And this is about nations that are prepared to stand by Ukraine, just as we are in the fight against Putin, so we will in the peace that we hope the Trump-led negotiations will secure.
But
it'll be in the context of any negotiated ceasefire that we look to be able to secure that peace long term, to build up the Ukrainians, because in the end it's the Ukrainians that are their best deterrent against Russia reinvading in the future.
But are you, as our Defence Secretary in this country, still prepared to put UK troops on the ground in that country to help protect a peace?
So Keir Starmer's made that very clear. If necessary, I and the Prime Minister are willing to do that. We want to do that if the circumstances allow us, as part of a way of leading international support for Ukraine in the event of a negotiated peace, one that ensures that peace will last long term, that Russia will never again consider invading Ukraine, and it's the Ukrainians themselves that ultimately will be their best guarantor and their best deterrent for that in the future. Our job is to support them become that.
There are so many things we could talk about, but I want to ask you briefly about reports this morning that 26 people have died in Gaza after Israeli tanks opened fire in a crowd near an aid centre. For you as a Defence Secretary, could you see yourself ever presiding over, ordering, planning the kind of campaign that the Israelis have been waging against Hamas in Gaza that has seen the loss of so many civilians' lives, scenes of such devastation, and people at risk of famine? Is that an acceptable way to conduct a war?
It's intolerable. And what we've seen overnight just reinforces that absolute imperative for Israel to cease this fresh military operation. It's an argument I made to my counterpart, the Israeli Defence Minister, very recently. The British government is arguing very powerfully alongside other allies. Israel must cease this new military operation. It must open the floodgates so that aid can get into those Palestinian civilians. And the work towards that hard negotiation of a long-term peace has got to start. And we are giving our full support to the US, Egyptian and Qatari-led efforts to reinstate a ceasefire in Gaza. It's absolutely essential for those Gazans.
You mentioned the US there. Your counterpart in the US, Pete Hegseth, said yesterday that the Chinese invasion of Taiwan could be imminent. Do you agree with him?
He was stating what everyone has recognised, that President Xi has put his own forces on a footing to be able to have the military strength if required. We and the US and the international community are quite clear. This is part of the, if you like, the complexity and uncertainty of
But do you think it could be imminent? That's what he said.
Our job, alongside the US and other allies, is to say to the Chinese, don't pursue any of your purposes by the military means. Don't disrupt the regional security and stability. And where we can play a part in reinforcing that regional stability, for instance with the carrier that the UK is sending into the Indo-Pacific at this present, or our alliance with Australia and with the US over new submarines for the future, we can play a part in reinforcing that regional security and saying to China, pursue this, resolve this by diplomatic and not by military means. There
are a lot of very complicated threats you're dealing with on your desk, but I wonder, some people watching this morning might listen to you talking about how the UK can be protected from threats from thousands of miles away, but then see pictures of channel crossings, the numbers of people able to get into small boats, make a short journey to the UK. If you cannot, which it seems you cannot, keep your promise of smashing criminal gangs to stop that happening, how can people have confidence that you as a government can protect us from huge adversaries like Russia and China?
Look, there's no overnight solution for this. You know, the truth is that Britain lost control of its borders over the last 5 or 6 years. And when the last government left office last year, the asylum system was in chaos, immigration was at record levels. We are taking steps, we're getting the legislation in place that will help us smash those gangs. But most importantly, with the small boats, and this was highlighted yesterday, we've now got an agreement and cooperation with the French to change their rules to allow the police, to be able to disrupt these gangs and these smugglers when they're in the water, not just on the shore. What we now need is to work more closely with the French to persuade them to put that into operation so they can intervene in the water, in the shallow waters, which they don't at the moment, as well as on the shores. That'll be a part of the picture for the long term.
OK, Defence Secretary John Healey, thanks very much indeed for coming and see us this morning. A busy week for you. Thank you. Well, remember, we want to know what you think, of course. It's John Healey's first interview he's done with us since the general election. Let us know what you thought of what he had to say. Kuenssberg at bbc.co.uk. The other details are there for you on the screen, along with the WhatsApp number 08000 282 161. So, Simon, let's come to you first. It was interesting to hear John Healey say Russia is already attacking us. But if you are, a normal person watching at home this morning, what are you meant to think of that? Because some of the language sounds like, oh, there's an enemy at the gate. Should you be concerned?
Well, I think you should. A little over 2 years ago, Putin did something that many of us thought was almost unimaginable, that his tanks rolled over the border of another sovereign nation. And the UK and many of our allies have put our shoulders to the wheel to support the Ukrainians. As John said, this battle has been going on in cyberspace for a long time. People inside the military and our intelligence agencies are in online hand-to-hand battle with Russians, Chinese, North Koreans and Iranians. So I'm afraid there is real reason for concern, which is why it's so important that after 30 years of underinvestment in our defence capabilities, we're getting on with it.
Shami, what did you think of what John Healey said?
I agree with a lot of it. Mm-hmm. Of course, Europe had to step up in the light of the change in the American presidency. There was no question about that.
When Trump said, we're not going to guarantee security in Europe anymore.
And I agree with what someone has just said about Putin. I'm concerned about weapons proliferation in the context of this domestic munitions industry that is going to be stepped up. Where are all of these weapons going to end up? Quite possibly in the hands of people we don't want to get hold of it. So I want some assurances about that. And I was a little concerned to hear John Healey, not once but twice, glory in the end of overseas development aid, which he said, is the diversion from overseas development to domestic munitions after these terrible conflicts in Russia and Ukraine. And goodness, please, if there's anything left in Gaza after this appalling situation in Gaza, there will have to be aid to rebuild these places. And so I think it's the zero-sum game between defence on the one hand and overseas development. When countries like China are there to offer aid to various countries in the global south, I think that is a bit of a strategic mistake.
Oh, Kiki, when you hear ministers talking about, we have to work more with industry, we have to get the economy going through policy decisions that we are making, as a business person, does it fill you with horror to imagine that ministers are going to be pulling more of the levers in business? Or do you think actually that's what we have to have? And if you didn't catch it, there was a bit of an eye roll there when I asked it.
I think business is doing quite enough to prop up the country at the moment. And I think that the savings could come from the civil service, which I know is not going to be very popular, but there is the civil service, to me, is completely overmanned and not working properly. And I think if you went through it with a dose of salts and tried to find some savings, you could find a lot of savings which could be spent on this and keep us safer.
Simon, what do you say to that then? You were the boss of the civil service. You've got a challenge from Kiki now.
I totally failed during my time as Cabinet Secretary. I was supposed to reduce the size of the civil service, but it actually went up. So, I agree, certainly across all of our public services, I think we could see be a good deal of efficiency and reform,
Well,
which I
that's
know
interesting.
that is something else that both the last government and this government has focused on, making sure we're using technology, you know, that sort of thing.
Why has it failed though then? Why did you fail? Which is, you know, admirable honesty perhaps from you, but why did you fail then? And why have successive governments failed?
It's actually quite a simple human thing, which is every time another thing came along, Brexit, COVID, Ukraine, the first answer in Whitehall is, I need more people to deal with that. These days, most modern businesses, when something new comes along, would say, where do I find the technology solution that I do? It's not people, it's, you know, it's about tech and things like that. And that mindset shift is, like, I think, one of the things that needs to come in the public services.
Careful about breaking the morale of people that you want to take with you, including on a reform journey. Sorry.
No,
Not that kind of reform, by the way.
I understand that. I just think that I think there were about 60,000 extra people who were taken on for Brexit and COVID, and I think they're still there. And I think you'd probably be able to confirm the numbers better than I could, but around that, and they're still there. What are they doing?
Simon?
A good number of very important things, I will say, but
yeah.
it is definitely true that across all of our public services, we could find a more efficient and effective way of doing things. And some of that, I mean, Shami is absolutely right. This also relies on recruiting the right sort of people who are motivated to perform public service, and it's the job of the senior leaders like me, failed, I admit, to give them the technology that they need to do their jobs well.
Just before we move on from defence, it is going to feel like a very big moment tomorrow. But tell us this, Simon, if something has not been guaranteed by the Treasury in Whitehall, does that mean this is going to happen, or does that mean that you may as well put your finger in the air and wait?
You're absolutely right to focus on Treasury spreadsheets, Laura, and I'm sure, you know, that the Chancellor is publishing the next 3 years' worth of those spreadsheets, as you put it, in about 2 weeks' time, the so-called spending review, which will set out government spending for the next 3 years. And I'm pretty sure that she and her team right now are in their offices working out what should go in those spreadsheets. So it's important that we look in about 2 weeks' time, 10 days' time, about what's in those spreadsheets.
OK, so I think that's a yes. If it ain't written down, it's not necessarily going to happen. Shami, I wonder for the government, you know, you are a Labour peer, you're not necessarily a big fan of Keir Starmer's brand of the Labour Party. Where do you think all of this focus on defence leaves the government? Does it change the atmosphere around them? Keir Starmer's talked a lot about security since the beginning of this year.
And you know, flags everywhere, etc., etc. And that doesn't make everybody in the whole Labour movement feel warm and fluffy inside. I think it needs to be certainly balanced with stronger language on giving people the basics. Food on the table, fuel that they can afford, shelter, a better life for their children and grandchildren, all these things that people are not feeling very comfortable about. That really matters to people. To remember, the British public ejected Winston Churchill in the 1945 election for Clement Attlee's government, which is about the NHS, the welfare state, and all those things that we hold dear too. So I think these messages certainly need balance.
And it's one of the difficulties for the government. And how do they keep their party happy? How do they keep the public happy? Which is not always the same thing. Simon, I'm just really fascinated to know, you were still in your job being the boss in Whitehall when this government came in. We heard so much before the election about how well prepared they were. And I think it's fair to say that did not turn out to be the case. What went wrong?
I'm pleased to say that's not actually a question for me. That's a question that you should ask politicians about the preparation. The one thing that I think was very clear, and I think people all over the country, your viewers will understand it, is this government walked in and on the dashboard of government there were red lights going everywhere on the economy, on public services, the international scene. And I think that was a pretty breathtaking experience for a group of politicians who hadn't been in power for 14 years, to come in and think, you know, here are all the things we promised, but this is the reality of the inheritance that we faced. It was a really difficult challenge. That's a difficult challenge for really experienced government ministers, let alone people coming in fresh.
You can talk about the gazillion-pound black hole that the last lot left you with. You can do that for so long. There comes a point when you have to have a story to tell about the sunny uplands on the other side. There needs to be a vision for people to get behind, and sometimes I'm not seeing it.
Kiki, what would you say about that, having watched them walk in?
Well, I can't understand a government who would walk in saying they want growth, because obviously growth pays the bills.
Yep.
You know, businesses pay the taxes, pay the bills, and who walks in and says, right, we'll put up employers' contribution because that's a really good idea, which of course has lost so many people jobs who've got families and mortgages, and I was sitting there listening to that. I just couldn't believe my ears. You then say you're going to take away the winter fuel payments, and I think there are people out there who don't need the winter fuel payment. I'm very happy to give up my winter fuel payment for somebody who needs it more. And so we were, I mean, the first budget, you just thought, what is happening? It was like someone threw chaos at us.
And Simon's nodding to that. I mean, you were there trying to ensure stability as one government moved to the next. What was it like? Was it chaotic and behind the scenes?
It wasn't chaotic. I think the scale of the challenge was huge. I think the thing that I would very much agree with Kiki about, and it connects to something that you put to John Healey, this extra spending on defence has to go into the pockets of British companies, British workers. It's really important that this isn't, it is about spending money, but it is about making sure that industry and British businesses get an opportunity to shine. And there are some amazing jobs for particularly young people all across the country, places like Barrow, where I do some work. There are great jobs, fantastic, high-skilled, high-wage jobs in the defence industry, and it's really important that we get some of this extra defence money into their hands.
OK, all three of you, thanks very much for now. I'll be back with you a bit later on. Now, you might remember the story of Sally Challen and her son's extraordinary campaign that changed not just their lives, but the law. Sally killed her husband. She never pretended that she hadn't, and she was sent to prison for murder in 2010. But while she was in jail, her family discovered the extent of years of abuse and torment that he had used to control her. After the campaign, she was able to appeal, and her conviction was then reduced to manslaughter, and she walked free. The concept of coercive control was then a novel one, but how much have we really moved on? Her son David's told the family's story in a book, and this morning he came and opened up about what it was like living with that family.
She'd done the worst act anyone possibly could do and took away my father. I couldn't understand it, but I knew something had been rolling. It was a snowball effect for weeks that I lived with her in the home where she had separated from my father, that something was happening, and I just didn't have the words to describe it.
Do you have the words now?
Yeah, words of coercive control. Those words set me and my mother free. It gave us a language to describe what was going on in that home, to describe the insidious nature that is, mostly non-physical violence, but coercive control can be, physical as well. But it was just words that robbed us of our right to have an ability to protect ourselves. Words that we have now, and words that continue to shape my life and wanting to speak out and share to stop the escalation of acts, to stop these events from happening.
In your book, you take us right into your family home, where as a young child and then a young man, there's such a sense of claustrophobia, and you describe your mum as a perfect silent hostage. What was it like for you growing up in that environment?
Well, I buried my childhood with my father, so I had to dig up the past to find the child I left behind. And it was the child that I always hid, because I didn't know how he experienced that world. But I knew I was born into this world with a gut feeling that something was inherently bad about my father. And I never knew why. I normalised the coercion and control in my home, this life of servitude my mother lived under, how she has to give money to him. She'd work and clean for family, just so she'd have pin money. The sexual violence is routine in her life. This is not just a story about exploring my childhood, it's about going into the past and my mother exploring hers and giving life to her. So it almost feels like an intergenerational trauma that landed in me that was an alarm. And so I always look for the signs of what we have, and if we don't have the language, that atmosphere, it seeps in homes, it seeps out of the basements, and it really lands and impacts children. I know many adult children will probably recognise this feeling, and it lands in you and permeates throughout your life in so many harms that you don't know how to describe. And that's what I've really set out to do in writing this book, to give voice to what it is like to grew up in a home where domestic abuse wasn't the word. It was coerced control, and it didn't appear on my TV screens. I had a pristine frontage of a middle-class home. No one thought it could happen behind those doors, but it did.
Do you think society now really understands this concept of coercive control, which is now also a crime? And, you know, the number of cases is going up, but the number of convictions is only a fraction of those cases. Do you think as a society at large we get it now?
It's a tectonic shift in our understanding of domestic abuse. This isn't policing relationships. I wouldn't even label it toxic because it's an arm's length term to disenfranchise any ability that we have to recognise and say that it's abuse and what are we going to do about it. That alarming nature to it. We're not tackling it enough. It's a decade on. The conviction rates are appalling. Just this week in my home county where this happened, 7% charge rate. I think, and I continue to speak out, because I don't want these events to happen again. I always said I would have wanted a flag raised in front of my family, so I would have had the ability to speak out. This story might have ended in my mum killing my father. She tried to end her life multiple times, which I recount in my book, in which my mother has allowed me to share this story. We have to see the scale of harm, and there's just no urgency. It's a normalcy of violence that's acceptable. It's acceptable, and it's just allowed to go on. It's awful.
Who do you hold responsible for that?
Leaderships. You know, this government recognises violence against women and girls as a main priority to halve within the decade. And it doesn't appear in any key leadership speeches at all. It's a background issue. And you can't just look at the next 5 years. You've got to look beyond that. Part of the reasons and the problems that we have issues in this country and failing to tackle domestic abuse is because we're so short-term with it. We don't trust the experts, the specialists and services and charities who work day in, day out, who are going through a funding crisis right now. We're meant to be making progress. And I know there's good people in this government that understand that. It's just leadership, always. You know, tackling male violence against women is a man's issue. A man is leading this government. What are you doing about the issue?
There are other concerns being flagged now too about a new kind of misogyny, sometimes being pumped out by influencers like Andrew Tate. I just wonder when, with the insight of what you've been through, do you think that's a new kind of threat? Does it concern you?
Social media is an exacerbating tool, and what we've lost sight of is the idea of having communities. You know, you look at what austerity's done to communities and stripping it bare for the last decade or so, and we're asking why so many young men and boys are getting captured on a sea of online hate by fishing trawlers of misogyny influencers who are just picking them up and throwing them inside closed Facebook groups and radicalising them and giving them a sense of their own identity back to them, a traditional form of masculinity, which many say, talking about your feelings now and trying to dismantle that and create something more healthy is a feminization of masculinity. It's not a feminization of masculinity to talk about your feelings. There is a need to recognize the holistic approach that we need to take in bringing schools and families and communities together to take them outside their bedrooms, away from those phones. Because social media won't be brought to heel as much as this government thinks it will.
Let's close with the thought then for your mum. How is your mum now? If I can say, I think you're seeing her today to give her a copy of the book. How is she now?
She's incredible. You know, she was a woman at the age of 15 who was captured by my father at the age of 21, and her life was groomed before it had even evolved into an adult person. So to see her grow coming outside of prison and find a happy life is an amazing thing to see. You know, she has an acre of land and she has peacocks that run around, and I'm so happy for her. And writing this book together, The Unthinkable, was really a togetherness of sharing her story, which has been difficult, but I'm immensely grateful to her, immensely grateful to the women in my life, and it's a privilege to share the story.
David Challen, thanks so much for coming in and sharing your story with us today. Thanks so much.
Thank you.
And if you've been affected by any of those issues, there's lots of help available, many of it on the BBC website, so do have a look. Now then, you know that there are ongoing ructions in the Tory party, miles behind in the polls, muttering about Kemi Badenoch's leadership. She told us last week people would be angry with the Conservatives for some time to come. One of her team is in a hurry, though. Robert Jenrick made headlines and tried to break the internet this week, posting a video of himself chasing fare dodgers on the London Tube. And today, Mr. Jenrick, you're saying that prison officers, in some circumstances, should have guns. So under what circumstances would lethal weapons be used in prisons?
Well, good morning, Laura. Thanks for having me on the show again. Look, our prisons are in crisis right now, and I'm warning today, as I have in the past, that unless the government acts, it is only a matter of time before, sadly, a prison officer is going to be held hostage and potentially killed. You've already seen situations like Axel Rudakabana, the incredibly dangerous prisoner who was the Southport killer, attacking, allegedly, a prison officer. You've seen the Islamist terrorist Hashim Abedi allegedly attacking a prison officer. And for these extreme high-risk prisoners, we've got to have the backs of prison officers. And to me, that means ensuring that within our prisons, there are specialist trained officers who have access to, in emergency situations, lethal weapons, not walking the wings, but have access to them if they need them, and that we give them stab-proof vests, that we give them tasers, that we give them baton rounds. We give them the confidence and the equipment that they need so they don't come home at the end of the day fearful for their lives and, God forbid, no one gets killed.
And at the moment, the government is considering tasers. They're going to trial that in the summer. The Prison Officers Association says yes, please to tasers, yes, please to stab vests, and the government is considering that. But going to firearms in a jail is quite a step. So in what kinds of circumstances would they be used? And how would putting more weapons into a prison actually make them safer?
Well, we're not talking about prison officers walking the wings with a firearm.
So what are you talking about?
We're saying that in a high security prison, a maximum security prison, where these extreme risk individuals are held, in emergency situations, the officers should have access to these weapons so that they can restore order in the jails. Earlier in the year, the Chief Inspector of Prisons, Charlie Taylor, wrote a report predicting that it was only a matter of time before drones would be used to get weapons, explosives into prisons. He could see terrorist incidents being planned from our prisons. And some of those things have already come true. Just this week, we've heard a prison officer being stabbed, and it is believed that the knife was brought in by a drone. So this is going to happen, I'm afraid, and the government are dithering. We need them to act. We've got to protect officers. And generally speaking, the safety of officers is now a massive problem. I was outside Wandsworth Jail the other day, talking to an officer who stood in his lunch break. I said, how are things going within the jail? He said, look at my boot. There was blood on his shoe. And that had happened at 10 a.m. that day. One of his colleagues had been attacked by a prisoner. These guys do not even have high-collar stab-proof vests right now. That's wrong. We've got to look after these people. They're doing a tough job on our behalf. They deserve this.
Whose fault do you think it is that prisons are seeing such levels of violence?
This has been a problem for a very long time. I am the first to say that we should have done more as a government, but we're in opposition now. It is my job to bring forward good, sensible solutions to try and protect these people. That's why I've asked the former prison governor, Ian Aitchison, to do a rapid review. He has brought forward these proposals, which I'm giving to the government today and saying, do something about this. Because if you don't, I'm afraid the consequences are going to be very, very severe.
But it is also part of any politician's job to be responsible for decisions that they were part of making. And you were part of the Conservative government. You were in the Home Office, not the Justice Department, but you were a government minister for a long time. There were years and years of cuts to the prison system, increasing numbers, falling officer numbers, barely an extra prison place built. Some people watching might actually think that you have got some brass neck to come and say you need to do something as radical as putting firearms in prisons to help manage a system that in some places seems to be out of control, which you helped create.
Well, look, I do think that we should have done more when we were in office. We built 13,000 extra prison places. One of the mistakes that was made was decommissioning the old Victorian jails before the new ones had come online.
You left the prison systems in chaos. And one of your own former Conservative colleagues, Alex Chalk, viewers might remember him, after he left government, he said, I was trying to say on the inside we had to do more, and the government wouldn't act, and we left behind a terrible legacy.
Look, we should have done more. But look, what Labour are doing now is making the problem worse. And they are reaching for the easy lever of letting prisoners out early.
Well, they're also building many more places.
I think that's disgraceful. Look, people are already incensed in this country about prisoners being let out early, and they're now saying that all sentences below 12 months are going to be scrapped. So burglars, thieves, people committing what I think are really serious crimes, like a thug who assaults somebody, very unlikely to go to jail. People committing even more serious crimes, like an arsonist or a domestic abuser, going to get out having served just a third of their sentence. And the most serious criminals, like a killer or a rapist, only serving half their sentence.
But
this is pathetic.
What was the
and if I could just say, Laura, because this is important, last week, MI5, the National Crime Agency, police forces like the head of the Metropolitan Police, said this is going to unleash a crime wave on our streets.
And yet many people would argue, and the government would argue, that they were faced with a situation where they had little option. Prisons were full to bursting, and they were forced to release people early in order to keep the system in something that looked even vaguely manageable. And it's a former Conservative minister, your old colleague David Gauke, who's made these recommendations about changing sentencing.
Well, look, I don't pretend there are easy answers to this, but I do not agree with the government that there is no alternative.
Or your old colleague, David Gauke.
What Shabana Mahmood, the Justice Secretary, has said is they need to find around 9,000 extra prison places in the years ahead. There are 10,800 foreign national offenders in our prisons. Get these people out of our prisons, deported from our country. If she brought forward emergency legislation to do that, like disapplying human rights laws, I would back her tomorrow. Get the 17,800 people who are in prison, on remand, awaiting trial, through the system. Get the courts working 7 days a week. At the moment, the Lady Chief Justice, the most senior person in the judiciary, is offering her extra days in which the courts could be sitting. She's not taking up on them. Look, I don't pretend these are easy. The country is facing very serious challenges right now. You've got wages that are stagnating. You've got energy bills that are too high. You've got illegal migration completely out of control right now. Look what happened yesterday. 1,000 or more people crossing the channel. My worry is that we are not making the right choices now. You've got Keir Starmer.
But you admit you made the wrong choices before.
Laura, I don't think Keir Starmer is a bad man. I just think that he is fundamentally ill-suited to these challenges. He is tinkering around the edges.
Well, this
We're a
is
strong
about,
country.
this is about what
we're
you
doers.
are doing.
We should be bringing forward solutions to these challenges.
This is about what you are now doing, and you've admitted that you got things wrong in government, but you've said that your party needs to get moving, to use your phrase. I just want to show people, in case they weren't one of the 18 million people that saw this on the internet, I want to show people what you've been up to.
Excuse me, do you think it's all right not to pay? Seriously, why do you go back to the barrier and pay?
So you were posting a video of yourself chasing down fare dodgers in London. Now, you obviously created a lot of the headlines that I suspect you rather desired, but you were talking about shoplifting, bike theft, and what you said were weird Turkish barbershops. Are you encouraging people to be vigilantes, to take the law into their own hands?
No. Look, my job as Shadow Justice Secretary is to raise issues, and you can do that in Parliament, and look, I do. I forced Labour to bring in emergency legislation to stop two-tier sentencing guidelines coming in the other day. But sometimes you actually have to get out there and get stuck in, shame the authorities into taking action. And I was fed up, like clearly many other people were, by the reaction to the video, at the fact that people were fare dodging. Ordinary people who are law-abiding feel like fools. They feel like mugs that they're paying on public transport and other people are not. And it's bigger than just public transport. You're talking about graffiti, people, playing obnoxious music on buses. You're talking about shoplifting, mobile phone theft. There's a genuine sense, I think, in the country, if you get out of Westminster, that the public realm is deteriorating.
And would you do that again? You do it when there isn't a camera following you? You do that kind of thing?
Look, I think it's something that we should do, but I'm not asking other people to do that. You've obviously got to look after yourself. But it's right that politicians raise these issues on behalf of the public. That is my job. That's what I'm always going to do.
And just briefly, it's a big moment for defence. The government's outlining its defence plans tomorrow. We've had a taste of what they're saying, but do you think they're on the right track?
We live in a dangerous world. It's absolutely right that we invest more in defence. It's good that there's this commitment to 2.5%. I think we should go further. We want to see 3% reached in this Parliament. 9 years is a long time to wait if you think the country should be on a war footing, as the Prime Minister has said. And I think John Healey is a very good man who's doing his best in the national interest. But you heard him today fail to commit to reaching the 3%. There is no firm commitment from the Treasury. And you've got Rachel Reeves, a Chancellor who has broken promise after promise after promise over the last 9 months. So why would we trust her to keep a promise that's 9 years away.
OK, well, the Chancellor will be in big focus in the headlights herself with the spending review in a couple of weeks' time. But Robert Jenrick, it's great to have you with us in the studio, as always, on a Sunday morning. Right then, let's see what was our panel's reaction to what Robert Jenrick was talking about there. Shami, you're a lawyer. You studied the legal system for a long time and worked in it.
Yeah.
What do you make of the Conservative set of proposals we've just heard about?
Well, I think the phrase you used at one point was brass neck. So the Justice Department and the justice system had, I think, the biggest cuts during those years of Conservative austerity. I think at one stage it was something like 40%. And that means not enough police officers, not enough court time, not enough prosecutors. And it's all very well for Robert Jenrick to do his little surveillance operation and become a social media influencer for people who aren't paying their tube fares. But that's not going to help victims of rape and violent crime who have not been getting through the courts in the way that we would want. So I think that's all. It's all fun for social media, but goodness me, that's after 14 years of austerity in the justice system in particular.
Simon, is it credible what the Tories are putting forward? I mean, do you see them as a credible force now? You worked for successive Conservative Prime Ministers. Do you think the current setup looks like a credible operation?
Well, the first thing to just say, reflecting on conversation before, prison officers, those are some of the many civil servants working day in, day out on behalf of our community across the country. And they're the people that we're talking about. When you go on prison visits and you see what prison officers have to do day in, day out, they are they are an unrecognised group of public servants, and they do remarkable things. Shami says we have a sort of national problem about crime and justice. We are, as electors, creating an environment where politicians promise us more and more tough on crime. We recruit more police officers, we increase sentences, we're creating new crimes all the time in legislation, and yet year after year after year we're failing to invest in our prison service. And we cannot go on like that. This problem has to be solved. It would be my view that Rob Jenrick said that he criticised the government for having to reduce the sentences that people would now face because of the overcrowding in prisons down to 30%. I suspect had the Conservatives won the last government, they would probably have had to do exactly the same thing.
Kiki, when you look at the Conservatives, and I suspect they're more your natural tribe than the Labour Party, do you think how they are working at the moment is credible?
Well, my feeling, going back to Jenrick, is to say that we're talking about prison places and prison officers, and we're talking about people jumping over barriers and things like that. But actually, let's try and stop crime in the first place. And I just don't think there's enough to stop crime in the first place. I mean, I take the tube a lot, and I go to meetings on the tube, and I see people going through the barrier with somebody else, or jumping over the thing, and you just think, oh, well, why not? No one's going to stop it. And you see someone's mobile phone on the street, taken, nobody's going to stop them. I mean, it's all those little things, I think, that the public are just sick to the back teeth with. And that's really, so we can talk about, tasers and jackets and everything else in the prison service. But I think it's much more fundamental than that. And I think we need to start tackling the crime at a much lower level, which then when you've committed 5 crimes and no one gives, no one finds out, you just go commit more.
And just final brief word to you, Simon. Having observed, the Labour politicians in the last stint of your job and Conservative politicians for many years before, when does this sort of balance switch? When does Labour stop saying the Tories made a terrible mess? And when do they perhaps start moving into taking more responsibility for their inheritance? And an example on prison places, Robert Jenrick said, we built 13,000 extra places. Actually, they closed many more. But when does that switch?
I suspect the general public doesn't really believe any of them on any of it. That's the general message, and probably what we'd all like is politicians to talk less and listen more.
Talk less, listen more. That's what we try to do here on this studio. We've enjoyed hearing you guys talk very much this morning. Thank you to our team at the desk, Simon Case, Shami Chakrabarti and Kiki McDonough. Thank you to you most of all, of course, as ever, for spending your Sunday with us on a day when the government is in full-on preparation mode for a big day on defence tomorrow. John Healey told us it's a time when we really do face very serious threats.
Russia is attacking the UK daily as part of 90,000 attacks we get that are linked to different states on our defence system in cyberspace. It's one of the reasons that we're acting already, and we're putting an extra $1 billion in to create a new cyber command and to link our armed forces with the digital connections that make them more effective in the future.
There'll be hawkish scrutiny, though, of whether tomorrow's plans really match up to the drama of ministers' words. We'll see. I'll be with Paddy O'Connell for Sunday's newscast a bit later, and of course you can catch up on iPlayer, but I will look forward very much to seeing you next Sunday, same time, same place.